Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Fiio M11 PLUS. Let me go ahead and turn on the screen so you got something to look at. This is a new Android-based digital audio player from Fiio. In fact, as far as I can tell, I think it's the latest in the M11 line, although this is the M11 PLUS. There's also the M11 PLUS limited version. This is not the limited edition. The difference between those two, if you're curious, is just the DAC that's inside of it. This is the ESS-based DAC, whereas the limited is an AKM-based DAC, but that's not that important. What's more important is that for the past month or so, I've been living with this player and really just trying to figure out what kind of Android compromise is this? Because I don't know, there's a bunch of different Android-based audio players on the market. There have been for a number of years, and usually there's some sort of compromise there, right? Whether it's battery life, usually performance. I don't know. There's a number of things, like you can spend a lot of money on an Android-based player, or you can spend a fair amount of money. How much do you want to spend? This one, I would say price range is actually kind of in the middle. It's around $700, which is definitely on the pricey end for a DAP, but it's nowhere near the top end for an Android-based player. But yeah, I wanted to find out what are sort of the trade-offs here with the M11 Plus, and is this a good enough compromise for me, for my life, and maybe hopefully inform you about whether or not this makes sense for your life. Now, the one compromise I will go ahead and point up front, and we'll talk more about this in the future, is just that this is a very hefty player. This is a very big Android player, which for a lot of people, I think that's going to be a positive, but we'll get a little bit more into that as we start talking about what I like and what I don't like about this player. But before that, I guess we'll just maybe start out with a quick shout out to Fiio for sending in the M11 Plus for review. If you want to check it out, I do have a link in the description down below. And other than that, I guess let's just do a quick tour of what comes inside the box with the M11 Plus. It's frankly not a lot. It's what you see here on the table, but it's the stuff that you need. So pretty handsome packaging as per Fio's usual. You do also get a USB-C to USB-A cable. Let's see if I can punch in on that so you can see that I'm correct. Yeah, obviously I didn't use that. You can charge it kind of however you want, but yeah, the player does have USB-C on the bottom, which is nice. It also comes with this cable, which, to be perfectly honest, this is not a thing I'd ever use. I'm guessing this is some sort of output. You can connect to the 3.5, connect that maybe to your stereo or something. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this thing, but this does support a line out mode on both 3.5 millimeter as well as the 4.4 millimeter balanced, which is kind of cool. You also get this, which is a SIM ejector tool, which we'll talk about a little bit more later when we talk about the things I don't love about this player. And then the other thing that you get is this little carry case, which frankly is actually a pretty nice case. Now, I don't know that this is a real leather case. I gave it the sniff test. I really couldn't tell. But build quality on this is actually pretty nice. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this case and how it actually interacts with the player itself when we get into talking about the handling and stuff like that. But generally, I think it's nice that it comes with a case like this. It's got like a hard back on the sides, or sorry, a hard back here, a little bit hard here on the sides, but otherwise, you know, it does cover up the buttons, which usually is not my favorite, but again, we'll talk about why, at least with this one, I didn't mind that too much. The other thing worth calling out is that there is actually a pre-installed screen protector on this device. It is a tempered glass screen protector, which is one of the nicer types of screen protectors you can have pre-installed. Ostensibly, you could get spares, although they didn't include any spares here in the box. You might notice I've got actually a small chip on mine, and that was a thing that I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how I did that, but I definitely did that. And that's just, that's a thing I've noticed honestly a lot with these tempered glass screen protectors, is that they are quite prone to chipping. So I might be inclined to actually just take it off myself, but I don't know. For now, we'll leave it there because it's not bothering me. But yeah, that's about as much as what comes inside the box. I guess I can do a quick tour of the hardware itself before we get into talking about what I like and what I don't like. And so I will try to spare the commentary as much as possible. But here's the unit itself. Like I said, fairly large. It is a 5.5 inch screen, which it might not sound that large, like an iPhone mini. This is like a 5.4 millimeter. Jesus, 5.4-inch screen. So this is a little bit larger than that, but the player itself is just like way larger than an iPhone mini. You can see it's more than double the size. Even like laid on top of it, it's larger. So fairly large hardware. Around here on the side, you do have your volume control, which we'll talk about this unit in a little bit. You've got your power button. You've got this button here, which is mappable, which is an interesting idea. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then over here on the right side is where you've got your main buttons. You got your play, pause, you've got your track, skip, previous, and next, which I actually do like that orientation now. You've also got a hold switch, and then down here you've got your SIM. Well, it's not actually a SIM card. That's where your micro SD card goes in. And it does require a SIM ejector tool in order to get to it. Around here in the back, I don't know, it's just glass. It's kind of got this interesting pattern, which it looks pretty nice, but like a lot of glass sandwich pieces of hardware, not my favorite, if I'm perfectly honest. It just, okay, I told you guys I was not going to get into the commentary, so I'll leave that again for later. But you can see that it does collect fingerprints, and it is a tad slippery to the touch. But otherwise, I don't know, you've got metal rails all around here. On the top, you've got nothing. On the bottom, you've got that USB-C, and then you've got actually 3 different audio ports. It is a little out of focus here because of my depth of field. I apologize for that, but we've got your standard 3.5 millimeter connector. We've got balanced 2.5 millimeter, as well as balanced 4.4 millimeter. So really, regardless of which type of headphone jack you prefer, I tend to prefer 3.5 millimeter, but no matter what you prefer, this has pretty much got you covered. And then you're only, I guess, let down if you like a 6.3 millimeter 1/4 inch jack, but you can stick to your desktop stuff. But yeah, I don't know, that's the hardware. I guess we can now just kind of dive into what I like and what I don't like. And I'm actually gonna start with what I don't like about on this player, just to get it out of the way. All right, so like I mentioned, this thing is just, it's large, and that's not my favorite thing about it. I wish it was a little bit smaller. I tend to prefer smaller audio players. Like for example, here's my Sony A105. I love the size of this thing. This is also an Android-based digital audio player, and so you can see they can get quite a bit smaller, but well, the A105 is not quite up to snuff with this in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's definitely big. If you prefer a larger screen, look, that's not going to be an issue for you. For me, when it comes to listening to music, I really don't really care about the size of the screen. So for me, I prefer something that's more pocketable. Here, this thing is, frankly, it's somewhat pocketable, but it is large. It is less pocketable than your average large smartphone because of just how thick this thing is, and the corners are a little bit on the sharp side. And then the other thing that I think is really worth calling out is that, honestly, in a lot of ways, this thing's kind of it's kind of an ergonomic nightmare. I mentioned I'm going to get the bad things out first, and this is like where the Fiio M11 PLUS is the worst for me, is in terms of ergonomics. Okay, so I mentioned it's big, it's slippery, it's kind of heavy. We're not off to a great start there, but again, that's a trade-off some people are going to be happy to make. The other issue for me is that the buttons on this thing, especially these volume buttons over here, are just a little bit too easy to hit. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this thing is so large and heavy. It's hard to hold this in a way where you're not putting your fingers on the buttons. And these buttons over here are not super, they're not like sticking out or anything like that, but like the pressure required to tag them, not super high. So when I put them in my pocket, fairly often I'll accidentally press buttons. The buttons that I especially press by accident are over here, these volume buttons. So this thing has got like this carbon fiber cover over it, which is interesting. And it looks like it's all one big button, but it does have distinct up and down clicks. You can see as I click that, the volume is moving up and down. But I think because it's so large, that contributes to making it really easy to press by accident. And then the other thing about this carbon fiber bit is that this is actually touch sensitive. So you can slide your finger up and down to adjust the volume on this thing, which sounds like kind of a cool thing. Like it gives you more of an analog volume control feel. But I found it just actually completely irritating. Fortunately, that is the thing that you can disable in the software, and I've got it disabled. Doesn't completely solve the volume being too easy to touch, but it does solve the unnecessary, in my opinion, touch controls. Okay, anything else that I wanted to talk about in that? Not really. Again, that's my biggest caveats here with this player in general, is just that it's large and the ergonomics are terrible, in my opinion. Now, I was mentioning this little carry case and how much I like this. I actually didn't experience this too much initially, because usually when I'm living with a DAP, I like it to be as small and compact as possible. I like to fit it in my pocket, and this thing was already large enough. I didn't think that putting a case on it would help things. However, I mentioned I got the screen protector chipped. When I noticed that, I was like, okay, maybe I should be putting this thing in its case after all. And that was when I discovered that this case, not only is it like a nicely fitted case, you can see how that fits around the bottom, covers it up quite well. But this case actually improves the ergonomics of it, all right, in a couple of ways. One, it's no longer slippery on the back, so I can hold it in my hand. It's easier to maneuver without accidentally pressing buttons. Two, it does cover up those buttons, which makes them, you could say, more difficult to press, but I don't think these are difficult to press. In fact, usually I don't like a case that covers up buttons like this, because they can be both more difficult to press and also more difficult to find. But this actually does it really, really well, partly because this play button in the center, see if we can punch in on that. I don't know if this is gonna really come through, but the play button icon on there is sort of raised, I suppose. And what's the opposite of embossed? These ones are kind of like sunken in, and here it comes up. So that makes it really easy to find by feel, which is an important thing for me. So I like that. It also ends up putting the volume buttons a little bit behind. You know, it's not much, but it's a couple, a millimeter or two of this leather material, and putting it back there means that I'm just not pressing those buttons by accident nearly as much. So as much as I might be loath to put a case on my digital audio players and make them larger, in this case, well, the M11 Pro or Plus is not really pocketable for me anyway, so the trade-off is just that the ergonomics get better on this thing. So I dig that quite a bit. All right, this is still the section where I'm talking about things that I don't love about this player, but this case does improve the ergonomics quite a bit. Again, it doesn't make it perfect, still has some issues. It's still big and heavy, still not really a pocketable player, but it's definitely an around the house, around the office sort of portable player. Okay. Back to the things that I don't love about this thing. There is, and I alluded to this a little bit, this button down here, which is a custom mappable button, which is kind of a cool idea. I don't even know, can I get this thing to go? Okay, there we go. Let's see if we can read that on the screen. You can press and hold the button and then kind of decide what you map it to. And these are your options, okay? You can add whichever song you're listening to your favorites. That's somewhat useful maybe, but that feels like a thing that if I were to press that button by accident, I'm gonna just have a bunch of, my favorites folder is just gonna be pointless and have a bunch of accidental things in it. Okay. Switch songs randomly, that might be useful for some people. I happen to be an album listener, so for me, not that useful, but maybe that could be useful for you. A play pause button, well, there's already one of those on this side, so I'm not sure why I would map this button to that. Switch filter, the switching between DAC filters, that's not a thing that, I don't know. You can have fun playing with switching DAC filters. There's not much to here, in my opinion. Switching equalizer, maybe that's useful if you're a bigger EQ person. I'm not. Let's bring this back up. Come back here, enter DAC mode. I don't know. Anyway, basically what I'm getting at, and I skipped this one. This one's my favorite. Delete currently playing song. So with one button press, if you wanted to, you can map this button to just delete the song that you're listening to right now. Basically what I wanted to say is just that I don't get why this button exists. The good thing is, kind of like the touch sensitive thing here, is that you can actually disable this button via software. Mine currently does nothing if I press it, which is perfectly fine by me. The only time it does something is if I press and hold it, in which case it comes up to here. But I just go no function specified, and then the button doesn't do anything, and I guess I'm happy with it. But it is just kind of an oddity that they put that button on there, and I don't think they needed to do that. Okay. What else did I want to mention? I did talk about the memory card on this thing requiring a SIM ejector tool. I find that pretty annoying, especially if you're putting music on this thing. by taking the SD card out, plugging it into your computer, etc., etc. Doubly so here when I've got the case on it, because now I can't even access the SIM ejector tool. So in order to remove the memory card, put more music on this thing, I have to pull the case off, use the SIM ejector tool, pull out the memory card, plug it into my computer, etc., etc., etc. Now, the plus thing, or the plus side, one of the reasons I like having Android on a digital audio player is that I can sync. I have software called Drive Sync that will automatically sync music to it. So for me, I actually have a way around this, but just when it comes to designing these DAPs, I generally am not a big fan of requiring a SIM ejector tool to get access to the memory card. Okay, hold on, we've got about 2 more things worth complaining about before we get to the really good stuff. Okay, like other Android-based players, this one you sign into your Google account with because it's got access to the Play Store, which is definitely a positive. Now, the downside with that is that now you have an audio player that's got access to your Google account, right? So if you've got all of your email, your calendar, your contacts, maybe you've even got credit cards or something on your Google account, now your audio player becomes sort of a vector, a security risk, right? And because of that, you got to end up putting on a lock screen, okay? At least that's the compromise, or that's the balance of trade-offs that I accept. Is I need a password between other people and the Google access that's on this device. Now, this is the thing I talked about when I did my review of the Sony A105 a couple of years ago. My way around that is to use this feature inside of Android called screen pinning. So the way that I do it is I have to swipe up to unpin the app, and then that brings me to the lock screen, at which point I can type in my security code and get into the phone as normal. Now, basically what I'm doing is I go up here, I pin the app, and then once it's pinned, I no longer need to use my password in order just to unlock the device and interact with my music. So that's good. Basically, you can't get past the music app, which is sort of the trade-off there. You don't need the password, but then you can't get past the music app. Now, the one thing why this whole story is worth mentioning is that there have been a couple of times, and I'm not sure exactly why, there it didn't do it, but sometimes when I do that gesture, which gets me past the app pin screen, sometimes when I do that, it just skips the password screen and goes right to the home screen. So it's essentially a security risk. I'm not sure exactly what's causing that. This is a version of Android 10, which is, I think, worth calling out, and that's actually a thing that I like about it. But there's something in there. There's some sort of security risk, and I haven't figured out the exact pattern to get through it. But if you're really worried about the security of your digital audio player, just with caution, okay? Worth calling out. Now, the last thing that I will mention as the thing I don't love here about the player is that it just takes a long time to charge. The battery in this thing is a 6,000 milliamp hour battery, which, if you're familiar with, the milliamp hours in typical phone batteries, that is a big battery. And because it's a big battery, the battery life in this thing is pretty decent. We'll get to talking about that in a little bit. But the side effect of having a big battery is that it just takes a long time to charge. This does file claims that it supports certain fast charging, and maybe it does. I don't know. It's hard for me to really know because I've hooked this thing up to a number of chargers in my house, including an Apple wall charger, a MacBook wall charger, which has got pretty high ratings, but maybe it doesn't quite interface with whatever fast charging mechanism or standard they're using. I'm not totally sure what it is, but just my experience with this thing is that charging it is, I put it on the charger and I just got to forget about it for about half a day, and then I'll come back to it and it will be fully charged. So yeah, that's a trade-off here with the M11 Plus. Okay, I'm done now, I think, complaining about this thing, because look, when it comes to these digital audio players, I get pretty picky about the experience. Those are the things that I think are not my favorite here about the M11 Plus, but now let's go ahead and go back to the table and start talking about the things that I do like about this. And frankly, for the most part, I think this is actually a really, really good player. given you're okay with the size and the $700 price point. Okay. What I do love about this thing, we just talked about battery, and this being a pretty big battery. The claimed battery life on this thing for listening is actually not that high. It's around 14 hours, which is pretty typical for most Android-based players. You might expect it being, you know, a 6,000 milliamp hour battery that you would get more than 14 hours, but no, you get 14 hours of playback. So not that great. But what I love about the battery here is the standby time is phenomenal. That was actually the biggest issue that I had with this little player, right? So this one has like a 1,300 milliamp hour battery, really small. Playtime is actually stronger on the Sony A15 at around, I don't know, let's say like 16 to 20 hours of playtime on this thing versus only 14 hours of playtime on the Fiio. But the battery in this is just a lot more annoying because if I don't listen to this for a day, the battery will kill itself. Whereas here in the M11 Plus, Fiio claims 1,000 hours of standby time, which is like 40 days. I'll be honest, I did not test 40 days worth of standby on this thing, but I can say just in my experience, if I put this thing on the table, you know, for a couple of days and come back to it, the battery has barely depleted at all. And for me, that is huge. That is more important to me than having a really long runtime. So I love that about this. If I use it sparingly the way I typically use most audio players, this thing will last me like, I don't know, about a week in between charges, which is pretty nice. If I use it like I do with some other smaller players like this, like I'll sleep and listen to this, well, because the battery life on this thing is only 14 hours, this thing will then become I'll need to charge it every day. You know, sleeping roughly 7 to 8 hours, that's about 50% battery. You can do the math there, right? I can't really make it 2 days with the M11 Plus if I'm using it as my sleeping player. But if I'm not sleeping with it, and that's where I kind of usually end up putting on a lot of hours. If I'm not sleeping with it, just living with it day to day, yeah, I can get through multiple days of this thing because of that standby battery. I think part of why the standby or just the general battery life on this thing is not phenomenal, you know, 14 hours again for a 6,000 milliamp hour battery might not sound great. I think part of the reason why is that the processor that they put in this thing is actually pretty good. Most digital audio players, and the Sony is a good example, this is not a fast player. This is a performance compromise, as you might expect to get a really small little Android player like this. But it's good enough for playing music. When it comes to using apps that are not the built-in music app here on the Sony, and this is true of also the Hibi R5S that I have, another Android-based player, they leave a lot to be desired. Whereas here with the Fiio M11 Plus, this is using a Snapdragon 660, which might not sound that impressive if you're used to hearing of, you know, the Snapdragon 885 or whatever the latest. I think they've changed their naming schemes. But if you're used to hearing the latest phone Snapdragon models, this is not the latest in there. Snapdragon 660. But for DAP standards, this is actually a really, really good performing digital audio player. In fact, I can, you know, use this. I typically just don't use streaming services on my other audio players because the app performance is just not that great. Whereas here, let me go ahead and switch into, what do I use? I typically stream with YouTube music, although ostensibly you could use, you know, anything else. And I'll just kind of give you a quick preview of what like the performance is like, right? Like it's pretty good. Let's see. Let's look up the Cure. Nope. I already had something typed in there. Typed in cute. Yeah, we'll search cute. Yeah, you can see generally the scrolling performance in this thing is actually pretty outstanding, which you might expect in most digital audio players for the native players. That is the case usually. But when it comes to using a streaming player, especially something like YouTube Music, this right here is, I did not preload any of this. Like this is just, that's good performance. And I think that, you know, is kind of contributes to that trade-off. You get the Snapdragon 660 processor. It's a little bit more battery hungry maybe than the processor that you get in the Hibi R5S, but the trade-off is you actually get really good Android performance there. I did mention this has Android 10, which I think is awesome. Not that Android 10 is even the latest version, right? We're up to Android 12 now, but there's still a lot of audio players out there shipping with Android 7, Android 8. So having Android 10 is quite nice. You do also get like access to all the gestures that are built into Android 10 if you're into those. I know some people don't like the gestures. You don't have to use the gestures. I prefer the gestures. The big reason I actually prefer the gestures is that the Fiio Music app, and maybe this will be a small little complaint, the Fiio Music app doesn't support a back button or like a backward swipe. So you saw that. If I wanted to like go backward, you have to use the back button. Now, when you're using gestures, you can use this sort of a back swipe, and that is using Android gestures. I don't know why I just went through the extent or through the pain of explaining that, but that's basically, it's rare that there are Android 10 based gestures supported on these players, and so I thought that was worth calling out here. And I guess we can talk a little bit about the app itself. This is Fiio's stock music app. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's actually a lot of features in here that I have not explored because I'm pretty basic when it comes to my music listening. I load up an SD card with my albums, and I browse by albums, right? Oh, that was the wrong one. Tap into Cigarettes After Sex. You've got my 3 albums. Tap into those. You've got all your songs. This is pretty straightforward and about what I want to see out of a digital audio player. A couple of things maybe that are worth calling out that I like the way that they're executed here. One, this is a very small thing, but I like that the Fiio app sorts alphabetically albums or artists, ignoring the word the. That might seem like a really minor thing to you, but when I'm bouncing between different digital audio players, listening to music on my desktop, and I'm used to looking for the cure under C because it's cure, not, I don't look for the cure under T, but a lot of digital audio players, you got to look under T. And I don't, it's a pretty small thing, but it bothers me. And here with the Fiio M11 Plus, I don't have to worry about that because it does sort artists by the first letter in the word that's not the. Okay, not a big thing. You can see that scrolling this thing is quite good. It does take a second to load the albums. Like, it won't load the albums until I stop touching the screen, or the album arts, but generally quite performant there. Anything else worth talking about this? I mean, I mentioned this is maybe just another small what it's like to live with, the button configuration, right? A lot of audio players will have a skip track on top and a skip track on bottom, and whether or not that's previous or next is pretty random. Here in the Fiio, this is previous and down is next. I actually prefer that because when you're looking at music, let's say, listening to an album, this is playing top to bottom, right? I'm starting there. I'm gonna hit the bottom button down here, and it's going to move me to the next track down below. Okay, these are the small little things that personally I like, so I'm calling them out here. I do like that stuff. Anything else worth talking about this app? I mean, again, there are a lot of features in this thing that if you're into like streaming music from your phone to your audio player, like that's something I would never ever do. But I know there are people for whom that stuff is important, and I apologize, I don't have a lot more commentary to provide on it from that angle. But just look up if you have a specific question about something, do leave it either in the live chat or in the comments. And I will do my best to answer whether or not this player supports a very specific thing that you want. But these are the things that are important to me. Okay. So that, I think, just about does it for the software. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, what I like about here on the M11 Plus, is, of course, the sound, right? That's important. What does a $700 digital audio player sound like? And what I think this thing sounds like sounds good. It sounds good. I'm not gonna get overly verbose and like poetic in my description of the sound of an audio player. I know a lot of people like really want to know how good does this one sound versus that player, and like they want to, which one has the most sound stage, which one resolves the best detail. And my opinion generally is that level of discretion and minutia, like that just does not really exist in these digital audio players. I have a lot of these digital audio players. I listen to them very closely, trying to hear for these types of differences that people are asking me about, and generally they just don't exist. An audio player, in my experience, either sounds good or it doesn't sound great, and maybe there's some pretty obvious reason why it doesn't sound great. And I'll say generally the M11 Plus is a player that falls in the sounds very, very good category. I will actually describe a little bit more in detail in a bit, but to start with, the specs. This is the stuff that actually does kind of matter. Well, at least some of the stuff does matter. The DAC that Fiio has put into the M11 Plus, that's a little bit of a close-up there you didn't need to see. The DAC that Fiio put into the M11 Plus is the ESS 9068, I believe is the model number. I actually spent a lot of time looking at ESS's their different model numbers. You go to their website, they have like 20 different DACs that they make. And all the specs on them are almost identical. It's really hard to tell the difference. What I do know about the 9068 is that it supports MQA unfolding, which most of them don't. I don't listen to MQA music. In fact, MQA is generally just kind of not that popular in the audiophile scene. So, well, at least not in the audiophile scene that I'm part of. So maybe not so much of a big deal, but the DAC in here does support MQA if you're into that. Other than that, there's really not much differences. The only thing I will say about the 9068 is that this is actually the same DAC that was in my favorite sounding audio player I've ever reviewed, which was the Estelle & Kern SE200. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Okay, so that's one of the specs. Some other specs in terms of like power output and this stuff. Again, this actually matters depending on what kind of headphone you're listening to. You need to know how much headroom you've got and the power. And the power on this thing is pretty good. I would say it's not phenomenal, but it's pretty good. On the standard 3.5 millimeter connector, which is what I use, maximum power output at 32 ohms is 210 milliwatts of power, which not super high, but to be perfectly honest, like I listen to HD 600s, Sennheiser HD 600s on low gain on 3.5 millimeter. And for me, it got louder than I wanted to listen to it. If you need more power than that, maybe you're listening to different headphones, maybe you like to listen louder, maybe you have a lot of EQ requirements, I don't know. For me, for my uses, low gain on 3.5 millimeters, plenty of power. Now, that's not enough power for you. Well, there is medium and high gain as well, but then if you go over to the balance connector, that's where the power output actually gets quite a bit more impressive. It gets up to 660 milliwatts of power, so over half a watt of power at 32 ohms. If you need more power than that, you're probably listening to headphones that I haven't heard of. Well, that's not totally true, but yeah, I'm not sure which headphones are going to require that amount of power. In my opinion, this thing's probably got as much power as anyone would ever need, but some people do want more power for what it's worth. I'm pretty happy with it. I think in terms of sound, the closest thing, well, yeah. The closest thing that I can say to a complaint about the sound of this thing is that you can hear the amplifiers kind of turn on and off as I press play and pause. So if I have a sensitive earphone plugged into it, you press play, it's not like a clicking sound, but it's just like a light popping sound, like a light, almost like you dropped a needle on a record or something like that. You just hear that like that. It's a slight analog sound. But otherwise, that's about it. Like the noise floor, I would say, is completely negligible here on the M11 Plus. I've listened with Maga OCK5, which is my most sensitive IEM. It's an IEM I use a lot of the times for testing noise floor on devices like this. And I found that on 3.5 millimeter, I don't think I could really pick up any noise floor at all. On 4.4 millimeter, I could pick it up a little bit. But even on 4.4 millimeter, even on the balance connector, it was, in my opinion, a negligible noise floor. So that's actually a really pretty strong positive, especially for a player that can output 660 milliwatts of power. Again, personally, I never left low gain mode, so whatever. So yeah, that's the closest thing I can make to a complaint. Again, no noise floor, but it does pop a little bit when you play and pause. Yeah, when the amplifiers turn on. Okay, now here's where I'm gonna get into talking a little bit about something that might be verging into placebo-ishness. I talked about digital audio players just not sounding very different from one player to the next. And again, I found that largely true here with the M11 Plus. But I always like to challenge myself with this stuff. And so what I will do is I will set up 2 players playing the same song, I'll volume match them, and I'll set them up through a little switcher so I can quickly switch between them to see if I can hear any differences, right? And this is where, like, when I see people talking about the differences between DACs and amps and describing like these wonderful sound stages and massive differences, oh, this player's so warm, like I try really hard to hear that kind of stuff, and I think it's basically placebo. That's my general stance. Now, if you have a different opinion about that, we can talk about that some other time. I'm not going to fight you on it, but I do still like to try and listen for differences. And with the M11 Plus, I think I heard a little bit of a difference. And this is again where I'm gonna give the caveat that the differences are so slight that I'm not convinced it's not placebo, but they're consistent enough that I don't think it is. All right, and those differences are, and they're very similar to the differences that I heard with. I mentioned that this has the same DAC as the Estelle & Kern SE200. The experience that I had here was actually very similar to that I found that the treble on this particular DAC is, I think, really, really well done. Listening to it versus, my Sony A105, the Hibi R5S, there's just an extra bit of effortlessness to them. Like, it sounds like the treble, especially with things like hi-hats, cymbals, stuff like that, like percussion that has a lot of, natural decay to it. It feels like the decay on those high frequencies is it's just a little bit more gradual and a little bit smoother here on the M11 Plus. Whereas listening to it in direct comparison with the Sony and the Hibi, it does seem like there would be times where like that treble roll off would just be a little bit more abrupt. And now, I don't want to overstate this, right? I think this difference is just super, super minute. It's the type of difference that if I'm not listening to them in that sort of A/B comparison scenario, I don't hear it and I don't care. Like, I'm not listening to this player and thinking, oh, that treble is rolling off a little bit, or the cymbal's rolling off a little bit faster than I like it to. Like, it's not that big of a difference. But if you are looking for that difference, I did find that this one does treble a little bit. Again, talking very narrowly about things like hi-hats and cymbals in music, but I found that they did decay a little bit more naturally here on the M11 Plus. Again, placebo, very possibly, but this is a similar experience to what I had with the Estelle & Kern SE200. I'm not 100% convinced that I would pass a blind A/B test on this thing, but the way that I was testing myself, it was kind of an A/B test, ish enough that I'm comfortable saying it here on camera, and if you want to prove me wrong, well, go for it. But yeah, I think that's really going to do it. That's a lot of thoughts here on the Fiio M11 Plus. For the most part, I think it's a really good player. It sounds great, performance is great because of that Snapdragon 660. Volume output more than I would ever want. The Fiio app is nice and logical, doesn't make any of the common mistakes that would bother me about some other players. And then the standby battery life specifically is just phenomenal on this player, which means I don't have to worry about the battery. I mean, the battery's gonna run out, but if it's running out while I'm listening to it, I'm aware of that. If the battery's running out when I'm not listening to it, that's when things annoy me. And I didn't have that issue here with the M11 Plus. So that really leaves just my only complaints about this player being, one, it's pricey. $700, this is not a cheap audio player. Two, this thing is a chungus. This thing is big and bulky. And because of that, like, it might not make my, daily life the same way that something small like the Sony A105 does. But when I'm sitting on the couch, relaxing, listening to music, especially once I put this case on here, this is a pretty stinking good player. And I think for that, I'm gonna give the Fiio M11 Plus a solid 4 stars out of 5. If you're interested in checking this thing out, I do have links in the description down below. While you're down there, if you found this video helpful, you liked it, please do hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell. YouTube will let you know next time I'm live. And then you can be here live and have a conversation with me like the folks that are here live now, which they are here. And if you're here now, stick around, let's have a chat. Otherwise, I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.